All right, so if you're paying attention to the Blackboard shell, it will look like we're skipping a couple things. And let me go here to. So we're technically we should have been wrapping up module 4, flexibility. So that would be that's the last lab you guys are going to turn in and submit for the passive range, active range lab that we did. And then we did the in-class activity for programming, looking at the different types of intervention, from looking at inhibition to facilitation. And now, and then the only thing we skipped was more of the movement screening, looking more at a global perspective. So instead of looking at like the isolated components or the special tests, we're looking at, just kind of the screening of where you would do your investigation or intervention. And then the last two modules, module 5, module 6, muscular fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness. Jump into those modules. What these are reviews of KIN 230. And the way this course was structured was before we had all that content online. And um, the videos that are there for like muscle, like if you look at the first lecture in there, it's this one here. This is the first lecture in that, and it's the muscular performance. And it does talk about like the different nuances between flexibility, strength, and endurance, but it gets into this max sub max aspect. But for the most part, types of contractions, isometric, concentric, eccentric, sliding filament theory, understanding there's hardware and software components to it. So the active, some of the things that would lead to muscle strength, hypertrophy. So this is all KIN 230 review, just as a refresher. The new things that are added to this is looking at this the muscular fitness component, which is like the 1RM strength. And so I'll talk a little bit about that today. And then what this leads into is the next lecture, which goes into program design, which is what we kind of talked about last week. And then what I had pointed out for you guys, this is your chapter 15 of your textbook. And this gets into the just different variables that are there to manipulate loading to change different components of the strength. And if you look at strength, you have, oops, we have a mobility component, so that was covered in the last module with the flexibility, and then we have the strength and endurance components. So when we look at strength and endurance, um, these are metabolic aspects and these are tensile producing aspects. So you have, when you look at strength, you have tension, mechanical tension as how much force you can generate, and then you have metabolic output in terms of the uses of energy. And when we look at the types of training intervention that we're doing, like what actually stimulates muscle hypertrophy and adaptations, you have training variables that manipulate more of the tension generation. You have elements that manipulate more of the metabolic process. And then you also have elements that are looking at the neuro control. And when you get improvement in performance, when you have increased muscle strength or output, it's usually along the continuum of all three of those. But depending upon how you're loading, and then as you guys do some more research as you move in your careers and you're looking at, well, what about this concept and that concept? It starts to play around with the reason why there's so many different types of routines and different things that exist within the fitness industry is that they all get results at some point. And depending upon where you're at in your race, if you've been doing more like mechanical tension for a while, you'll have rapid improvement, and then it will plateau a little bit. And then it's time to start focusing more maybe on like metabolic adaptations or neurological adaptations. So you just kind of vary your or cycle your training or your manipulation of your variables to try to get different outputs and outcomes. And so just because something's working for someone right now doesn't mean it's going to work for them all the time. And just because something didn't work or stopped working doesn't mean it's not going to work. So all of it is good. It's just depending upon, like when you look at your ingredients when you're baking, flour, sugar, all those are good, but you've got to have those in the right aspect. Like not neither one of those are bad or good. It's just more of proper balance. And so when we look at here, let's scroll down here. How you would normally assess strength is in terms of the most popular way is the 1RM test, like your bench max, like how much you bench press, how much you squat. And there's really no standardization for any of these things. And I got to be honest, I don't think there's a lot of carryover in some of these aspects. I think like the NFL is a good example of bench press. And when they look at all of the recruits and all the potential players, and they look at their performance in the combines and the different events they do, They have a bench press aspect, and we look at bench press 1 RM, how many times you can do, or how many times can you do 225 pounds, which is more of a muscular endurance aspect than it is muscular strength. But both of those metrics, neither of those carry over. So if you scout, if you track the players through people that have had like phenomenal bench press have done shit on the field, right? Or don't even make it. And people that are like phenomenal performers on the field, they kind of have a crap or garbage bench press. So it's one of those exercises that's a big lift. It's a big lift in terms of like powerlifting, and it's like a bravado thing between guys in terms of, oh, how much you bench, right? And no one ever tells the honest answer. And then you got guys like me that are saying bench press sucks, don't do it. And it's a popular exercise, but it doesn't really carry over. It doesn't really mean anything. It just means that you're really good at bench pressing. Now, if you're in the sport of powerlifting like Tommy or anyone else, that's a big thing, right? But the way the powerlifter bench presses is totally different than how the traditional bench press exercise is performed. So just because you can do these strength measures doesn't necessarily mean they're telling you anything. It's like the sit and reach test where, yeah, it's a popular test, but it doesn't really tell you anything. But where you'll use a lot of this 1RM, oh, and let me just qualify that most of the time you'll be working with people, it's going to be inappropriate for you to take them, especially if you have a beginner or intermediate, and to see what they can do one time. And to what end, right? Okay, great. You know you bench 200 pounds. What does that do for us? What does that mean? And did you do that and you're going to blow out your shoulder, or is it meaningful development or stress on the tissue? Where this concept of one repetition maximum comes in isn't so much in the what you can do one time, but what you can do multiple times. So a 1RM, the RM stands for repetition maximum. And one means that it's the amount that you can do one time, no more, no less, right? You left it all on the table there, or most of it. But you don't have to have a 1RM. You can have a 3RM, a 5RM, 10. You can have a 22 RM. And basically it's saying how many repetitions can you do until you hit that failure point. Now failure is a ambiguous term. It means different things, but we'll clarify that in a minute. But it basically means that you've gone to your capacity threshold and you've hit 3 repetitions. So whatever weight it is to do that. And what you'll notice in a lot of the programming, like when you read through your chapter and when you look at like people that know what they're doing, develop programs, they don't put weight down. They don't put the load. They don't say, hey, use a 45-pound dumbbell or 35-pound dumbbell or for 125 pounds or whatever the weight is. It's all based on a repetition, because the repetition is assumed when you ever see these repetitions outside of, or these prescriptions outside of like a rehabilitation setting or someone that's just learning, is there always implied that you're going to momentary failure, right? Where you're going to that 80% threshold of resources, sometimes 100%, but there's nothing magical in the number 10 RM. And 10 RM means different things to different people. If all of us right now, we sat down on a bench press and we want to see what weight can we do 10 times to failure, we would have the same training stimulus because all of us did 10 RM, but we would have totally different absolute workloads, right? So Tommy versus Julia versus Kate versus Gerard, you guys are all going to perform different because you have different levels of adaptation. So if I did the opposite and I said, okay, everyone go squat 200 pounds. Some of you that's a warm up, some of you that's your max, some of you that's your working weight. So when you look at how you're going to prescribe exercise to people, how you're going to program, it's never really the weight. The weight's individual to the person. It's really the repetition maximum, right? In each of these, if you look at the exercise variable chart, these were linked to certain physiological adaptations or physiological outcomes. And so that's how we track this. This 1RM is 100% of your performance effort, but the assumption is that you're doing 100% effort in each of these submaximal components. Now, these can go as many numbers you want. You can have 100 RM, but it gets kind of hard to count that over time. And then you're really testing more cardiovascular metabolic functions than you are. So you normally don't see repetitions done past 20 reps, right? Like I said, unless you're doing some kind of rehab thing or sports thing, or you're just a beginner trying to learn and you're doing some drills, but you're typically seeing in the single digits and maybe up until like 15 or so. So there's a linear relationship that exists between this. And, you can play the scale, if you will. So if you had like a 1RM is consistently 100% of your resources being contributed to that. And then you can see the 5 RMs 85%. And these numbers vary a little bit depending upon who what researchers are, but they're close, within 2.5%. And so what that means is, I'll just use easy numbers, is if you can bench press 100 pounds and that's your max, that means that you probably could do 75 pounds for 10 reps, or you can do 60 pounds for 15 reps, right? If your bench press max was 200 pounds, your 1 RM would be 200 pounds, your 5 RM would be 170 pounds, your 10 RM would be 150 pounds, right? It's just a percentage. So if you really wanted to get a 1 RM for a client, but they were somewhat of a beginner intermediate, you could reverse engineer it. You can extrapolate it out, meaning that you could probably just have them do a 10 RM, because 10 RM is probably a rep or set that they're doing at failure anyways. And let's say they're failing out at 100 pounds. So if they do 100 pounds and that's 75%, if you did 100 divided by 0.75, you would get like 125 pounds for the 1 RM. So you can reverse engineer it that way. And what we do in lab, what we used to do in lab, but we would do a 1 RM bench press, and then the next day or the next class period, we would do a 10 RM, and we would compare, and we would just basically validate this scale, the chart. And if we go into the we basically validate this and see how close we were, and we would do like a couple exercises: the lat pull down, squat, and bench, or we would do some of the other exercises like leg press, or some of the single joints, so it's not so complicated in terms of neural output. And then we would just basically see, and what you would see is a quasi linear. We're pretty close when I do this every semester. Is that what you can do 10 pounds, 75%? It matches up pretty nicely. So just as a heads up for the final exam for this class, you'll be given a situation where you'll be given some of these workloads, like you have a client that has a 1 RM bench press, or a 10 RM bench press, and you'd be asked to extrapolate. Well, what would you predict they would be able to do 1 time, or what would you be able to predict they can do 5 times? So that's looking at the assessment aspect. What you guys are going to be doing mostly is the other way, is doing more of the programming. If someone can do let's say they can do 200 pounds once. Now you want to figure out what should they be working out at 10 reps, and they should be working out with about 150 pounds. And all I did was take 200 pounds and take 75% of that, and that's what I should be able to do 10 times. If I want to know what they should be able to do 17 times, I'll take 60% of that 200, which would be 120 pounds. If I want to know what they should be doing 3 times, that'd be 90%, so they'd be doing 180 pounds. So you guys make sense? See how that works, how you would play this? So you're looking at it in terms of what your assessment is. If you wanted to really like, oh yeah, I want to know what my bench press is, but I don't want to do a 1 RM, well, I can kind of extrapolate and predict. Or if someone wants to make that attempt, you know where to start with. Like, oh, I'm only pressing 180 pounds 3 times. Well, it's unlikely you're going to get to 215. So let's start at like 195 or 200. So that's one way of looking at it from the assessment perspective. The other way is looking at what physiological outcomes do I want? Do I want more strength? Do I want strength hypertrophy? So then what rep range do I need to be at? So then what load do I need? But I want to reiterate, what drives your programming is the rep range. You're prescribing exercise based on reps tied to the outcome. The load and this are implicit, they're implied. But the numbers are going to vary for everyone. Like in terms of load, in terms of how much weight you use, it's going to vary for every person. Everyone's going to be different. What's not going to vary is prescribing exercise based on reps. So let's say all of you guys were on my team and I was your strength coach and I wanted to prescribe an exercise. If I want everyone to be at this phase of the training working more on neural drive and strength, I wouldn't say, okay, find a weight to do 200 pounds. What I would say is, okay, you're going to do a rep. You're going to do 5 sets of 3 to failure, right? And so then I'll know that everyone, even though everyone's going to work with different weights, everyone's kind of in that same program. So what I'm describing is this concept of absolute versus relative workloads. And if you look at the definition of those terms, they mean exactly how we're using them. Is absolute is the total number. And that's the number regardless of what your performance is. Relative is, what does that weight mean to you? How does it relate to you in terms of your performance? And so if what an example of an absolute workload would be 200 pounds or 175 pounds or 10 pounds, right? It's a number regardless of, is that 100% to someone, 80% to someone, or 55% to someone. Now the relative workload would say 10 reps or 3 reps or 5 reps, because now, although that's the workload, you're going to have to figure out your load. It's going to be relative to everyone. Everyone's going to be at that 85%. So you guys see the difference or see that subtle difference between relative versus absolute? And when you look at everything you're doing from fitness, what most people are doing in the fitness industry, they're all doing with absolute workloads. They're looking at, oh, I did 120 pounds this week. I'm going to do 125. I did 120. I'm going to do 130, right? And what you should be doing is looking at the absolute or the relative workloads, because it does two things. The relative workloads take in consideration the uniqueness of the individual you're working with. So it's a non-cookie cutter approach to training. What it also does is it takes in consideration the variability that that client's going to present with. What that means is that if someone had a really shitty day the night before, their threshold's going to be lower, their capacity, their resources are going to be lower, and their ultimate absolute performance is going to be compromised. So if you're looking to stimulate, not annihilate, you just want to get a training stimulus, you're not going to say, okay, well, you did 120 pounds this week. We're going to do 120 pounds that week. If you're focusing more on the repetition, the relative workload, let's say like 10 reps, they will start doing some of the warm-up sets, and they're not going to be able to do it. They're going to be like, this is, and so you're going to have to make an adjustment during the training session and actually lower the weight, which is a good thing, because what you're doing is now you're matching. So this is what you plan. This is where they're at. If you intervened here, you're going to be overstimulating. You're not, instead of taking one step back, you're taking 1 or 2 steps back. And so what you're doing, if you're focusing just on 10 reps instead of the weight, you're able to match them where they're at, and all you're stimulating. So you're able to stimulate. Yes, it's a lower load than the week before, but that's okay, because all you're trying to do is get a metabolic or mechanical or neurological stress, and you've done that. So it allows you to kind of do an interday, if you will, or like in the moment type matching that stress level. It comes back to the Goldilocks principle. Goldilocks principle of that not too much, not too little, just right, has to be assessed somehow, and it's done from this relative workloads instead of these absolute workloads. On the contrary, let's say they come in and they were like great night's sleep, like the stars were aligned, their moon, whatever reason, but their threshold levels here, and you try to come in at 120 pounds, instead of hitting 10 reps, they might hit that for 12 to 15 reps, you understimulated. So it allows you to kind of match and say, oh, let's ramp it up a little bit. Today's a good day. Let's do it, right? So you kind of have to have that play. And that's what makes a really good trainer or fitness professional or even therapist, is the ability to make changes on the fly to match the load with where your client's at. That's really is the secret, is that's the skill. That's the, not the skill. That's the art of intervention, is can you match those loads to get that perfect physiological response? Now, you're never going to get that perfect, but you should at least be conscious about it and thinking to try to get into that. And it all comes back to this chart here and looking at this concept of relativity versus absolutely. So again, you want to purge out of your mind these absolute workloads, and you want to start to think in terms of relative, both from the population, from diversity of population, but even within the individual in terms of the variations they're going to present on a day-to-day basis. Now, when you're working with clients one-on-one, that's easy to do. When you're working with group clients, like 1 to 4 small group training, which is a very popular modality for training, or it almost becomes impossible when you're working with teams, but that's just the level of individual. And that's why one-on-one sessions cost more. One on 4, a little bit more affordable, and teams are, you don't make any money with sports, right? So let me see. Hide this. Oh, still on a lot. So this is the actual relationship to, let me see how this varies. What's 85% is 6 reps, and I have 85% here. 5, yeah, so you can see like there's a little variation between like numbers. And I forgot where I got this data from. I just like this when I put this in an Excel sheet. It made it nice and easy. But you're going to be within 1 or 2% of those. So don't freak out too much if they're not there. But again, just kind of understand how you'd play the relationship between absolute workload and relative workload. And these lecture slides are on Blackboard. So I just to give you a heads up of what I'm doing, I'm at capacity. I can't produce as many videos as I need to. There's just too much that I have to create. So I'm going to be relying on these live sessions to basically be my lectures. So it's unlikely that I'm going to put a video out going through this lecture slide. This is what this is serving right now, our time together. I'm going to put videos out on like more clarification and specific stuff that goes in deeper. But just a heads up that that might be a good thing or bad thing, but it'll be more of these live sessions that are going to be acting as the lecture instead of instead of the videos. So what I want to point out here is this concept of working to failure, and so that's what's implied when you look at those prescription ranges. So if I say 10 RM, it doesn't mean just do 10 reps and you really could have done 15 and you stopped at 10, or I told you to do 10 but you only knocked out 6. When you're working in that aspect, if you knocked out 6, right, you're kind of working more at this range here, more of like neurological aspect, but I wanted you to work out more at 10, more of like the tissue or metabolic type. If you were shooting for 10 but you only did 3, you were working out way too much, right? It might be too much stimulus. So the relative versus absolute, and it assumes that you're going to your capacity. Now, what that means, how that would be terminized, or the definition for that, or how that would be phrased, is going to failure, and that means different things to different people. And there's 2 types of failure. You have this complete failure, which is like total exhaustion, which when you look around in the gym, you see people working out. That's like when your form goes to shit, and you're like, or you have someone that's spotting, and spotting's supposed to be for assistance or for safety, but you have someone that's doing these forced out reps. That is going to 100% of your capacity. And that's like going, if you look at your exercise intensity, partial image. So I want the full image of that. It's one of my lectures. I'll just grab. So going to like the red zone, like you are pushing it. It's like having a car and you're exercising. You're going as fast as you can when you're running. Instead of going for a jog, you're just like you're pretending someone's chasing after you and you're fearing for your life and you're running as fast as you can. That is, and then maybe doing and there's some other types of techniques that people do in the gym, like drop sets, where let's say they're working out with 120 pounds and then they take 5 pounds off and they bang out a couple more reps, and they take another 5 pounds on and bang up another reps. It's people that get to concentric failure, right? They can't do anymore. And then they do like these heavy negatives really slow, and someone lifts them up. And these are all great techniques. These are great techniques to use once in a while to break through training plateaus. The problem is that people use these all the time, and it's like that go hard, heavy, or go home, like no pain, no gain. Like it's this concept that you got to leave it all on there. And think about an athlete. If an athlete trained like they competed, right? Like every time they were they put it all out there. There's some athletes that do that. Those are the athletes that are hurt all the time, right? So there's a 1 step back, 2 steps forward component, and you need to stimulate, not annihilate. And going to total failure all the time, going into that red zone, you're using tissues beyond what you're at this point you're annihilating, not stimulating. And in order to get to that stimulation, that happy medium, you want to be working out in that like orange zone. And the yellow and green zones would be the Goldilocks principle of not too much, and the red zone would be too much, right? So that happy medium is like kind of this orange yellowish zone, depending upon where you're at. But that's about 80% left on the table. And so if you watched, you guys noticed in the announcements, I kind of put some of these videos. Now this guy, Jeremy, I think his last name's either. His stuff is good. Like he puts good science stuff out there. But what I don't usually use YouTubers as a reference, but he has this interview with this guy named Brad Schoenfield, and Brad Schoenfield is this researcher out of either New York University or New York State University, and there's not a lot of all the research in training has all been around like athletes' performance, but not so much in the bodybuilding aspect, and not so much bodybuilder like bro science type stuff, but really into how do we develop muscular strength that's not like meant for ultimate performance. And even within the athletic community, most of the research goes into like more VO2 max cardiovascular type stuff, because cardio was where all the research dollars were at. So no one really looked at resistance training from that component, and gets into like the science behind a lot of these exercise variables. The lecture that I am going to Got to bring my screen. He's got this textbook, The Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy. So the video that I'm going to be posting this week is going to be highlighting elements from this particular textbook. And so basically it's a lot of verbose, it's basically looking at a lot of the meta studies and research out there. So it's all evidence-based. And then basically what I'm doing is looking at we're just talking about the highlights from there and looking at the research behind like these key points. That's really what the value of this textbook is. So I wouldn't buy this textbook because it's a lot of fluff and filler, really good stuff, but really comes down to the key points. And I'm going to distill that and put that into the video. Videos is that he really goes into, he basically boils it down into like volume, total volume that's supposed to be hit like 10 working sets per workout, and then the total 15 to 20 sets of training stimulus per week, and then talks about this junk volume and some of the aspects there. And he basically interviews Brad Schoenfield. So it's Brad Schoenfield that I'm emphasizing here, not Jeremy Either. But Jeremy Either's stuff is good because he bases it on science. It's a little incomplete, and it's still more of it's not bro science stuff, but it's more bodybuilding leaning. So there's still a little bit of things that need to be cleaned up, but all in all, it's good. So I actually posted a couple more of his videos because I thought they were well done and I didn't have to create them. So they were good enough in my book. So, so then that's what leads us to away from we're here. So when we look at then the working out to failure, the complete failure aspect in one of these videos, and maybe not one of these videos, but in the video that I'll produce, it really delineates between the complete failure and the momentary failure. So the complete failure is going to that red zone, 100%, leaving it on the table. And these are good training things to do once in a while. The momentary failure is what you're looking for. And what the momentary failure is that if you were looking at traditional training, you would be able to bang out 2 or 3 more reps, but that would get you to this complete failure. And you would have some compromise of one of these 3 parameters. Either form would go, so you'd have this really good form, and all of a sudden you'd see a little like deviation, right, to the left or right, bench press. Your technique starts to go, so you start to arch your back, or you start to, let's say you're doing rows, you go from like a static position and you start to like use a little body English, or the tempo that you set. So let's say you're doing 2 seconds down, 1 second up. When fatigue starts to set in, you're either you're gonna slow down. So let's say you're doing 2 seconds up, 2 seconds down, 1 second up, but you hit that 1 rep, and now all of a sudden, and you guys have been there when you've hit that point where you're kind of going pretty good, and then all of a sudden it like it slows down. Right when that happens, although you could probably bang out 2 or 3 more reps, that's when you should stop. That's the point where you've stimulated, not annihilated. Now, if you're just doing 1 set to failure, which I don't recommend, but 1 set to failure, you might not get a good enough training stimulus, but you're going to go and do another set, and then you're going to do another set. So you're going to get that motor unit recruitment and that exhaustion that you need through the volume that you're doing, right? So that's like one of the concepts. There was a big program that was a big popular book that like the super slow system of training, where you do like these really heavy eccentrics, 1 set to failure, and that was it. And people were getting some progress with that. And the problem is that if you take sedentary individuals and you have them do something, doesn't matter what it is, you're going to see progress. And so that's the real true testament. Is not, are you able to get someone to get progress in the first 8 weeks? Anyway, you can get one of those shake weights and you're gonna get progress, right? The question is when someone hits a plateau, are you a plateau breaker? And that's what you want to be. Is you want to be a plateau breaker. You want to get people that have kind of hit that peak, and then, oh look, I got another step in gains, or oh look, I got another step in gains. And that's where knowing your tools of your craft, making sure that you're not taking 2 steps back or you're waiting too long before intervention. It comes from the programming aspect of it, and that's where you really understand your variables. So that understanding the concept of like absolute versus relative workloads is key. And then understanding this concept of momentary failure versus complete failure is the second part of that equation. And if you keep those 2 things in your mind, like absolute versus relative workloads, and you look at this concept of momentary versus complete failure, and realize that I didn't say either of these were bad or good. I said you're going to use these and you're going to use these, but this is those things that you pull out once in a while. This is where you spend most of your time, right? This is working to the red. This is working in that orange zone. And this is what's going to get you your progress faster. This is where you're going to stimulate just enough to get the change and then allow enough capacity to recuperate. And so if you're working to momentary failure and you're working within that relative workloads and you're matching the load to the thing, you're going to have athletes that are not injured. You're going to have people that are making great progress, and you're going to have people that are seeing a really fast trajectory. When people are going to focusing still on absolute workloads and they're going to complete failure, they usually either get hurt or they stay in that they take 2 steps back, 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 2 steps. They don't make any gains, or they stay flat for a long time. So hopefully that makes sense. I mean, it's simple concepts, but it comes down to little things. And then the last thing I want to talk about, which I think we brought up before, is this concept of tempo, because it is one of the training variables. So if you look at exercise variables, this tempo or this time under tension, this is basically looking at how long are you doing your lift. And when you look at some of those videos that were posted from Jeremy Either, and based on the research from Brad Schoenfield, that your total rep, like each rep should be between, it doesn't mean you wouldn't do longer stuff, but then you're outside the realm of strength training. You're looking more at like flexibility, mobility, or some kind of other aspects, right? There's nothing wrong with doing a 30-second isometric hold. But when you're doing like a wall sit or a plank for 30 to 60 seconds, you're not really building strength. You're looking more at like endurance and metabolic aspect and lactic acid clearing. So you're looking at strength training. And when I say strength training, I just don't mean like, oh, you're an athlete trying to improve performance. Every client you're working with is focused on strength training. You're focused on the increase and the preservation of lean body mass, right? Now, not everyone you're working with is a bodybuilder, they want to bulk up, but focusing on the acquisition and the maintenance of lean body mass is crucial to quality aging, metabolic performance, and ability to withstand, right? That's the pure definition of fitness. So strength training. And so your rep should be between 2 to 6 seconds. You can distribute that 2 to 6 seconds however you see fit between the eccentric and concentric phase of that lift. So you could stay within like a 3-second or 4-second repetition, and you can have like 2 seconds down in the eccentric, 1 second transition in the isometric, and 1 second up in the concentric. You can flip it and do 1 second eccentric, 2 second concentric, or you can spend like 2 or 3 seconds in one of those phases, and each iteration of that has a different experience to the client and has a different outcome. And I think I have, I think I provided it in the, I know I provided it in the KIN 230 class, but I have that one slide. Do you guys remember that slide where it shows that you're about 20 to 30% stronger eccentrically than you are concentrically? You tend to have more tissue stress. I'll post it as a kind of a guideline. You tend to have more tissue stress, so more hypertrophy with eccentric training. You have more tissue tension. You have more like metabolic outputs from the concentric aspect. And if you spend time in the isometric or you delay that isometric, it creates more effort within the exercise. So you could take a squat 5 reps or 6 reps, and you can change the exercise just by manipulating the tempo and where you're distributing that time under tension. It's one of those underutilized training variables. It's one of those things too, where let's say you've been working out, let's say 200 pounds, 10 reps, and you can do that without problem, right? You can do a couple more, but if you try to go to 205 or 210, that's too big of a leap. So how would you micro progress your training? And what you can do, instead of always looking at increasing the tissue load or tension by adding weight, you can change the tissue load or tension by manipulating your tempo. So let's say you were doing 200 pounds, 10 reps, and you're doing 2 seconds down and no pause and 1 second up. So each of your reps are taking 3 seconds. And let's say you just added 1 second to the concentric phase. So 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up. That's 4 seconds now with time under tension, compared before where you say you were doing 10 reps, 2 seconds, that was 20 seconds of total tension under 200 pounds. Now, just by, you didn't change the weight, but you changed the tension, you added a second on there. So now you're doing 3 seconds. Your whole set is taking you 30 seconds to do under 200 pounds. Your muscles have now been under tension for 10 extra seconds. That's enough to be a training stimulus where you can make the exercise harder without making the load heavier. And this is where the concept of training smarter, not harder, comes in. So it's a good way of manipulating your training variable. And it doesn't matter what hat you're wearing in the future. As a physical therapist, you're going to be using this shit all the time, or a PTA or an aide. As a strength coach, you should be using this stuff all the time. And as a trainer, you'll be using it a lot. And it's the best way of, like, if you're working as an athlete, like we'll use Tommy as example because he's on here for powerlifter. His tempo, the training tempo is going to be explosive because that's what powerlifters do, is they in and out of the hole, right? Down and up. The only reason they slow down is because they're trying to overcome gravity and muscle tension generated. So for Tommy, he as a powerlifter, I would probably train traditionally and use heavy loads, because when he's exposing his body to workloads, and this is from the 230 lecture when we talked about the articular system, that when you're that 200 pounds or whatever weight that he's using, that's putting tension not just on the muscles, but the tendons, the ligaments, the cartilage, the joint capsule. And you are accountable for that when you're looking into recuperation. So when you look at your next training session, it's not just, yeah, the muscles got a good workout. It's, hey, did the connective tissue, did the tendons, the ligaments, they all recuperate? And when you look at what puts stress on the articular system, it's total load, right? So 400 pounds versus 300 pounds versus 200 pounds. With muscles, total load is not the only thing. It's the time under tension that also stimulates. So if you wanted to say preserve joint integrity, instead of, I don't care that you bench press 200 pounds, but if we do 200 pounds and you're pushing your scapula into that position, that might be too much on the connective tissue. Let's get the same exhaustion or recruitment by using 170 pounds or 150. So it's 50 pounds less that's on the joints, but the muscles are still going to failure. They're still going to that fatigue, because now instead of doing 2 seconds down, 1 second up, or if, let's say it's Tommy, 1 second up, 1 second down, I'm going to change it and say, hey, look, I'm going to do 3 seconds down. And that 170 pounds should have a similar recruitment pattern, or at least a similar tension and training effect to the 200 pounds. And I'll just let you think about that for a second. So I can get the same training effect with 150 pounds that I can with 200 pounds. Now, I wouldn't do that with an athlete, because athlete wants those motor unit recruitments. They want the performance aspect, but that's going to be more neurological. But if I'm looking at just tissue adaptation, I can use lighter loads and just slow them the heck down, and they're going to still hit that exhaustion. This is also really good to do with people that are learning things. And so what they want to do is they usually want to go fast to get it done, but you can force them to slow down, just like we talked about in 214. They should be able to deliberately stop at any phase in that lift. And so again, it's one of the most, it's an underutilized variable that you can use for both learning and for like conservative energy for the joints, and for breaking up monotony in the training. So hopefully those are like 3 really profound things, and that's really the focus of this, is this whole concept of relative versus absolute workload, the momentary versus complete failure, and then understanding this concept of tempo as an exercise variable. Any questions at all? No questions. Okay, so the video that will come out is going to be more focusing on the looking at the exercise variable. It's really going to focus a lot on the volume, and that's the next thing. If some people get things wrong, and looking at like how many work sets you're actually doing. But let me talk about the assignment that is going to be due for next Tuesday, which is your individual training program. And then what we're going to do on Thursday, and keep in mind, Tuesdays are optional, right? These are recorded, so I'm not taking attendance, and they're not, but Thursdays are required because that's the normal time we'd be in class. And so all the gradable things are going to be on Thursday. All of like the preview stuff's going to be here on Tuesday, and then it'll be recorded. Thursdays will be recorded too for your review, but just keep that in mind. So then what we're going to do on Tuesday is we'll kind of go through all of our, so you're going to watch these videos, you're going to go through the aspect, and you're going to do the programming. You're going to look at you're going to audit your workout program, and you're to update it. And you're going to look at it and make it consistent with what we're learning from this particular class, and maybe adding a tempo component. And what I actually want you to do if you're training is mess around with it. Go out and play with tempo and see if it feels any different when you're doing it. And then what I also want you to do, so then Tuesday we'll discuss it. I'll ask you guys to just kind of volunteer. You guys will submit that to me, so I'll be able to look and I'll see who's made some changes, and then we'll just discuss it together as a group. And I'll just randomly pick a few, and we'll go through and talk about it out loud and answer any questions. And then on Thursday, I'm going to have you guys. Then what's due on Thursday next week, not this Thursday, Thanksgiving, but next Thursday, is you'll take a client that would be more particular, like more not particular, but more realistic. So someone like in their 50s or 60s or maybe even 40s. So someone like your parents' age. So it can be your parents, or and try to match the training goals. And if they don't have training goals, just try to match training goals for a general population, like just boost a little bit of body fat and get a little healthier. And then I want to see you create an exercise program. Now, you have to take in consideration when you look at your chapter. You have to take in consideration your, this is the steps you'll follow, like the steps for designing. And I kind of line this out. But the thing you have to kind of take in consideration. And so looking at, are they beginner, intermediate, advanced? This is the very first thing that you're going to do, because all those variables and everything, that all the sets that you're doing, the splits, is all different depending upon, are you dealing with a beginner, intermediate, and advanced? And so like on the final for the case studies, you're going to have to develop a workout for beginner and for intermediate or quasi-intermediate, advanced, depending upon where they're at. But you're not going to be told that. You're going to have to assess that based on the health history, based on the client information. Okay. So make sure you read through the chapter and kind of look through this. And then each of the variables in terms of the goals, but each of the variables for like training frequency, and it breaks it out from novice, intermediate, like how many days a week they should be training. It looks at exercise selection, like how do you order exercises. Generally, these are just guidelines, not hard and fast rules. So there's always exceptions for most of these. But like, for instance, you're going to want to put like your big compound exercises first. And then if you have leftover some of your assistance exercises or isolated joint exercises, and kind of go through the exercise order, how these are done. It gives examples. And then it gets into the like the loading. So like your repetition, there's that chart again. So what range are you going to be working out in? And more so tying that to the training goal. So you get someone that's looking to increase their vertical jump and you're working out in the 12 to 15 rep range. I'll be like, what the fuck are you doing, right? You should be at the 1 to 2 rep range, 3 rep range, because you're looking at more performance and explosive power. And everything you put in here, you're going to have to defend. So you're not touching the right, like, oh, 3 sets of 10 because that sounds good. No, because I want to do bench press because of that. You want to make sure you're looking at, you want to be particular about your exercises. And the other thing I want to just remind you of too, this is from KIN 230. In that Module 7 folder, I have the movements with muscles. And you really, this is what I don't like about Jeremy either. And this is what I don't like about the aspect of bodybuilding, is that you are not training muscle groups. You're not designing extra chest for the back. You are creating exercise programs for your the muscles that you're stimulating are muscle groups. So your vertical pressing or horizontal pressors, or your pulling movements, your sit stand, your hip dominant, or your bend, or your knee dominant versus hip dominant. So make sure you're looking at muscle groups and not so much on the isolated, oh, I have to have an arm day or a shoulder day, or I have to have like a calf day. These are all ancillary things. Same thing with like core conditioning, core training. There's really no such thing as the core. It's just more, if you have a dysfunction, then you might need to do some core specific training. But if you're training, if you have a diverse level of movements and you're training outside of machines, you are involving core aspect, right? The ability to stabilize your spine while you squat is more core than 15 different ab exercises that you're decided to do. Okay. So just think in terms of like, really what you're doing in this programming. What I find more students do is they find themselves less focusing on the exercise itself, because it really doesn't matter, and liberating themselves from like all these, oh, do I have to do incline bench press or decline bench press or delt, which can be convoluting. It's almost like counting calories in diet. It's like, shut up about it. Doesn't matter. Just do a push something away from you, pull something towards you, change elevation, and then where the focus should be is in how are you manipulating that, right? And then keep in mind that your big picture, when you step back, you don't have to cover all these exercises in like, you don't have to do incline, decline, and flat all in the same workout. You're part of programming is keeping the nervous system on its toes, and you want to create a little bit of variety. You'll be changing your workouts like every 3 to 6 weeks, right? You shouldn't go more than 12 weeks without like without changing things up, right? And I think 6 to 8, and I don't know, Kate can maybe jump in on this, like what they're doing with their athletes, but when you look at periodization schedules, it might be as quick as like 1 or 2 weeks, they're onto something new. So you don't have to try to fit it all. What you're going to find when you watch those videos is that you only have about 8 to 10 sets per workout. That's it for your, not per exercise, total exercises for the training day. So how are you fitting all that shit in, right? You can't do all that. You're going to have to cycle it through. So you might be doing incline bench press for a few weeks, and then you're going to put that on hold and you're going to decline. You might be doing conventional deadlifts and then go over to stiff-legged deadlift and then maybe sumo style deadlifts. You might be doing low bar squats or high bar squats. You're going to vary it because you're not an athlete. You don't have to worry about a particular movement. All you're trying to do is stimulate muscle tissue to get growth while protecting and preserving the other connective tissue. And you want to create this variety throughout the aspect. And then you have a whole psychological game too with the whole variation. But that will be in the video with the variety. So, all right, any questions now that I dropped all that? If you have questions while you're going through your assignment, you can always send things to me before Tuesday. So that will be due Tuesday. We'll discuss it on Tuesday. You'll get graded for it, but the big grade is going to be the one on Thursday with your the one you do for the new person. So I'm assuming most of your guys are going to be intermediate to advanced, so your training is going to be there, and then most of your parents are going to be a beginner to intermediate, unless your parents are working out or whatever. But make sure there's a differentiation between what they're doing, you're doing. You're going to have different schedules, so just it's fortunate you to kind of work through. It's the first time you're probably thinking about getting programming outside of your own. Some of you probably are working with clients already, so that's fine, but most of you not. Cool. I'm going to stop the video and then I'm just going to talk briefly for 10 minutes on the KIN 214.